Welcome to Spotlight on Schools. We focus on the Rochester City School District. I'm your host, Jim Strauss. Today our guest is Ms. Willa Powell. She's a member of the Rochester City School Board. Welcome to Spotlight on Schools.
Thank you for inviting me.
On this program, we've had the superintendent of schools, members of the district staff, building principals, teachers, students, experts, reformers, but we've never had a member of the school board. So I look forward to getting more of an insider's view of what you see as the real role of the school board and clearing away some misconceptions, and there are some about it. So let me first do an overview of the members of the school board. First of all, it's not a requirement that any school board member be an educator.
That's correct.
The former president of the school board and still a current member, Malik Evans, he's a banker. The current president, Van White, is a lawyer. The vice president, Cynthia Elliott, is a human services executive. Melissa Campos, she comes closest. She's an instructor with Dale Carnegie. Jose Cruz is a businessman. Mary Adams is a nurse. All of you have some involvement, though, in community organizations, and I think all of you arrived at your positions through the Democratic Party. That is, you're all elected.
Yes.
Which brings us to you. Tell us your path to becoming a member of the Rochester City School Board.
All right. Well, I jokingly refer to it as the mommy track. I first got involved in the schools when my daughter enrolled in first grade and got pressed into the PTA and PTA presidency. Learned about the district parent council and stuck a toe in that water and realized that there was so much more to schools than most parents experience, and so many more ways to contribute than most parents know. I also have professional experience. I was a programmer and project manager. I have an experience in the military, which is something unique that my colleagues do not share. But all of it allows me to look at the school board work in a systems perspective, which I think is a unique contribution. And that's what I think is important about democratically elected boards, is that we do bring different skill sets to the district and are able to look at the very big, very important decisions with a critical eye, looking at different elements of it. The superintendent is always going to be looking for the instructional quality, but someone has to ask the questions, how much will it cost? And someone else has to ask the question, is this the best that we can get for the money that we have to spend? Others are going to ask, did you involve the parents in this decision? What do other people think? So that's the virtue that people with so much varied background brings to an elected school board.
Now, something I just found out, you are the longest serving currently as a member of the board, right?
Not the longest serving ever, but I have, well, since 1997. So 16 years? I lose track sometimes.
Now, you had children in the district then, and you have children in the district now.
Yes. Right. Two of my kids have graduated. I have a high schooler and an elementary schooler still. And
you say a military background. You have not just a few years, right?
No, 21 years. I retired captain in the Army Reserves.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I want to talk about the role of the board. A few months back, I interviewed education beat writer for City newspaper, Tim Macaluso. He said the school board has essentially three functions. One, to hire the school superintendent, and he will be the educational expert. The second function is to oversee the budget, and now I'm paraphrasing this third one, to hold meetings where people can come and yell at you when they're displeased with the schools.
Yes.
Those three functions, how accurate is that?
Oh, well, he got 2 out of 3, so I guess he gets a passing grade.
Okay.
The coming and yelling at us part is sort of wrapped in with the second. The process of approving a budget and managing the fiscal resources of the district are all together in one, and it's because we hold those monthly meetings in accordance to open meetings law in the public eye. People do come and yell at us and tell us what we are doing wrong or what we're not doing at all. The third function, in reality, is to set public policy, which also requires public input. It also requires that we have discussions about policy in the public eye. Policy like whether we should have a JROTC program tends to attract a lot of attention, right? Policies about a code of ethics, about parent involvement, Even things like naming schools attract attention, and people want to weigh in on them.
Now that's public policy as opposed to educational policy.
Policy that governs our district and the behavior of people, the teachers, the principals, the superintendent. We can't affect state policy. When the state says we're going to have a Common Core curriculum and we're going to have standardized tests, our answer generally has to be, yes, sir, how high, sir?
It's a good military answer.
we can resist on our own time, shall I say? But board members are agents of the state. We're operating in an environment that the state created, calling it the school district, and we govern the school district that is a creation of the state. Mm-hmm. Furthermore, it is the state's obligation that we succeed. That's the argument behind the contract for the Campaign for Fiscal Equity lawsuit that says that asks the question, who pays for a sound basic education? And the answer is, it's in the state constitution. The state has declared that it is in the business of educating our children, but it continues, even so, to manage it through local control, through policies set by local school boards.
It seems like we're getting away from a parent who will come and say, my kid can't read, my kid can't do computational math, my kid is failing in the classroom, my kid is unengaged. Is that up to you, or is that up to your? I mean, is that the place for a parent to come and bring that concern? We
get concerns like my child doesn't get along with his teacher. We have to fix this. My principal won't listen to me, and those are legitimate questions to channel through the board, because the board needs to know what the weaknesses of the institution are. We need to know that principals don't always treat all of their parents with real competence, that they're not always sensitive to the needs of the parents. We need to know that, but it's not my business to solve every one of those problems. I'm then going to refer the parent to an office that handles specifically those kinds of parent engagement problems, or if it's a student that has an IEP or who's a special needs student that needs special services, I'm going to refer the parent back to an expert in the district.
Okay. Well, we're running out of time on this first segment, so when we come back, I want to talk about whether the school board members should become educational experts, and then I want to talk about your relationship with the superintendent. So stay right there, we'll be right back. Okay. Welcome back to Spotlight on Schools. We've been talking with Ms. Willa Powell. She's a member of the Rochester City School Board. We've been talking about the role of the board and what the Board of Education should do. I want to ask you this question. I said before we expect the superintendent should be the expert on education. I have a follow-up question. Once the person becomes a member of the school board, I'm wondering, did you feel that you should become more of an expert on some of the fields in education? For example, to look at research on what makes a school an effective school, or the effects of concentrated poverty, or solutions that other places have found?
Well, there are layers to that to answer that. One of the first things that I did as a school board member was found myself on the finance committee because of my financial background, and just trying to understand the process for doing our capital improvement plan or managing our buildings and the funding streams for that turned out to be an enormous lift all by itself. And understanding that process, then it was on me to help my colleagues understand that process. Not just because I was there before them, but because it's a tough process to understand. The other some of the other aspects of becoming an educational expert, in my experience, as limited as it's been with raising kids over almost 30 years.
That's not insignificant.
I have found that you do need to do a basic reading of the research on what makes schools successful. But I've also found that the research often has been designed with the conclusion in mind, and that the research then has essentially been cherry-picked to lead you to the conclusion that its author has already decided. So you have to take all of the research rather with a jaundiced eye. The other thing, though, is that as a parent, you know, I really only have to ask the same questions as a board member as I would as a parent. Is this appropriate for my child? Is it okay for test questions to span the range from 3rd grade reading to 5th grade reading in the same test and expect all of the children to be able to show mastery in the 4th grade? Is it appropriate that the children perhaps haven't learned some basic reading fundamentals and are expected to continue on because, oh, we can't go back? No, I agree, none of these children know X, Y, or Z, but we can't go back. Those are the sorts of things not just a board member, but parents and other advocates need to challenge and say, wait a second, we don't leave children behind, and yet we have a whole classroom here that, you know, I can't think of the example, but many of the children in my son's 4th grade classroom did not understand a certain element of reading, and yet they weren't going to go back. So my son had to do some work at home, and I felt bad for the kids whose parents really weren't even aware that their child had the same deficiency. So,
I see. Okay, I would like to talk more about that at some other time, but I got a bunch of questions. We can't go back. No.
Well said.
Okay, I want to talk about the interaction of the board with the superintendent. To what extent, actually I got 4 questions here, and you can pick any of these to answer in any order. To what extent do you have ongoing communication with the superintendent? To what extent does he consider your input? To what extent does he share data as he collects it? And how often do you evaluate his performance?
Okay.
Any of that?
Well, the last one's easiest to answer. He does get evaluated annually with, in theory, there are quarterly occasions where we give some off-the-record performance feedback so that he can change course before the final evaluation is written, if need be. The other questions tend to be more flexible based on who needs what when. If the superintendent needs our vote, he's going to reach out to every board member as often as he needs to get our vote. He's going to provide as much data as he needs to get our vote. As such, a board member that is, or a board in general that is just a little bit hostile to their superintendent keeps the superintendent on his toes. But you don't want a relationship that's gone toxic. You have to have a healthy skepticism because even the best of superintendents, the most ideologically suited for their district and who believes in school boards will from time to time forget what the role of the school board is and will want to get out ahead of his board and forget to keep his board informed and up to date on what his thinking is, and forget to ask, is this a direction you're willing to let me go? So.
Now, I know that he needs your approval of a budget that he submits. At what other points does he need your vote?
Well, when it's time to close schools, which schools to close and why, whether to open a new program. And, for instance, All City High School. All City High School is not a high school. It's a program designed to try to bring the specific needs for children who are overage and undercredited and help them get graduated. They still officially belong to some other high school. And if they do achieve what they need to graduate, they go back to East High or Edison or Monroe to graduate. But that was an example where the superintendent needed the board's approval in order to launch that initiative. So in the reverse, there are board members who want something of the superintendent. I have my Young Mothers program that I cherish. Van White has been striving towards getting a second School of the Arts.
And we'll be talking about that in a few minutes.
Sure, okay. So the superintendent generally understands that he can't keep getting something from us without giving something back. And often, if we're smart, we the board, we're going to tell the superintendent through our budget priorities what we'd like to see funded in the next year.
Okay.
That gives him a heads up and makes it very clear, if we can think that far ahead, makes it very clear what our expectations of the superintendent are.
Okay. I want to ask you a question about evaluation. I have a question that sort of is connected to this. The superintendent was here with me last year. This is actually the beginning of his first full year. He made it very clear that he had two goals for his first year. One was to increase attendance for grades K through 3. I was very surprised to hear that the largest, the grade at which there was the most truancy was kindergarten. Right. And it was very important to him that K through 3, that they be there to get those really important skills. And he was going to focus on that. The second thing that he wanted to do was to have third graders reading at grade level by that year, which seemed like a massive task. At any rate, I asked him if he had a plan in place to accomplish that. I had to ask him a couple times until finally he said yes, he did. I didn't have enough time in the program to ask him what the plan was. Anyhow, it's now a semester past the end of the first year, and I haven't seen any reports on either of these goals, and he's had time to collect data. So, have you heard? Was that one of the things you evaluate?
It's one thing that we pay attention to, but I mean, we have a broad spectrum of things, just the management of the district, setting aside specific individual years' goals. When it comes to the attendance initiative in particular, he hadn't set a target that I'm aware of, but you can see the evidence that he has a plan. You hear, we see repeatedly that—
Now the plan, you're talking about attendance right now. Okay.
Specifically attendance. You can see that he does these walks through the community and tracking down children who haven't been in school at their homes, knocking on doors. He's doing it with people from Wegmans and Bosch and Lomb and the mayor's office at his side. So in part, so they can see what the obstacles parents are facing themselves, for themselves, and see that the obstacles that parents are facing getting their kids to school are not the doing of the district. So when we can start to help our community understand that we can't fix education if the kids aren't in school, and we can't get them to school. We don't have police officers that will show up to their door each and every time mom doesn't have them ready for school. So I think it's important that we understand that as a community that there are barriers to a child's success that we can't fix. Another aspect, and even with his truancy initiative, he may be moving the dial. He may not. But one dial he's moving is the public awareness dial. We may not be getting kids to school through this initiative. If in the number of visits that he personally can make, or that Danny Wegman can make, or Paul Speranza can make with him is so few that it would make no more than a percentage point difference. But if we can help our community understand that poverty plays a role in this. When kids don't have coats, they don't go to school. When mom is sick because she didn't have a coat and got a cold or the flu, the kids don't go to school. The barriers when children live in poverty School is often the very first thing that they let go.
Right.
And that's not necessarily right. But we also can't necessarily judge the family for making those decisions without knowing what they're facing.
Mayor Richards did offer at one point to have more people get involved, including the police, and
it was met with some
Dr. Vargas said, well, no, we're not going to go there, not yet.
Right, right. We don't want to be in the business of, sort of jackbooting families into getting their kids in school. On the other hand, when a child has reached the point where they've had missed 20 days of school at any given grade level, that's the threshold when the county will accept a PINS request, a persons in need of supervision request. If a child has been truant for half a school year, which is 90 days.
20 days is a month.
Right. And there's only 180 days of school on the school calendar. So if a child has missed half of that, 90 school days, and no one has taken the effort to initiate a PINS request and get the county involved and county services involved, we have to, there's somewhere in between no policing at all and a PINS request that surely we can execute a plan that will persuade families to do what's right by their kids.
Well, it involves activating social services at a much quicker,
absolutely,
much quicker trigger.
Right.
All right, well, we have gone over the time limit for this segment, but we'll be right back and talk about perhaps achieving a reading level at grade 3. Okay, we're going to pause. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Spotlight on Schools. We've been talking with Willa Powell. She's a member of the Rochester City School Board. One of the last things we were talking about was evaluating Superintendent Vargas's promises of his first year. The first one was to increase attendance in K-3, and the second one was to have students reading at level by grade 3. That's the one we'll talk about here. But in the break, we said that, or you said, that it's hard to talk about the one without addressing the other to achieve reading level without increased attendance. You want to continue?
Right. Well, first we know that the reason that kindergarten attendance is as bad as it is prior to this year it wasn't mandatory. We now have state legislation that allows us to make it mandatory here in Rochester, which means once a parent has enrolled their child in kindergarten, we can hold them accountable for making sure that child goes every day. Without that, before it was made mandatory, a parent would very often just look outside, it's snowing, it's kindergarten, my child doesn't really have to go to school, it's not mandatory. But now what we're saying is, yes, kindergarten is mandatory, and oh, by the way, behaviors that you form when the child is in kindergarten don't stay in kindergarten. You tend to treat the education process the same in first grade as you did in kindergarten. So that's the reason that the superintendent and this board endorsed a mandatory kindergarten is we have to alter people's behavior, and because their behavior dictates their attitude about education.
I also had the district director of the pre-K program here, and so many of those behaviors begin at the pre-K program as well.
Which
learning how to stand in line,
right.
Learning how to wait while someone else is talking. These are behaviors that are so necessary to learn in the classroom.
And often come naturally to parents, to children in middle-class suburban families. It's part of the family culture, but very often in the urban setting, the family culture is very different than what we middle-class white folks might presume.
Or a culture of poverty.
And poverty, right. Very often kids, they're set down in front of a TV for the first 4 years of their life, and nobody talks to them except to, tell them it's time to come to supper, or, it's really very discouraging to see what poverty brings with it, and as a result of that, if nobody's talking to Johnny, then his vocabulary is only this big, whereas their suburban counterpart, his vocabulary is 10 times that big.
So the process of learning to read, it may be impossible to bring all these kids to third grade level.
Right.
Especially if, now you were also talking at the break about how there's such pressure to get so much else into the curriculum besides just reading, the pushing down.
Right. First, as we just talked about, the basic skills of interacting with other children, washing hands, standing in line, have to be learned in preschool and kindergarten, which in a suburban district we would just assume these kids already knew. Then you have this process of the state has been pushing the demand down. What used to be taught in first grade, the pre-language skills, pre-reading skills, is now found in kindergarten. So kindergarten, you can still not enroll your child in kindergarten. It's not legally mandated. So, and if you don't enroll your child in kindergarten, then they don't have those skills necessarily at first grade. Pre-K, the things that used to be taught in kindergarten, shapes, colors, the basic alphabet and numbers, that's all in preschool now, not kindergarten. You better know that by the time you get to kindergarten. Mm-hmm. So, there's always been a push, and as long as I've been a board member, an understanding that a child learns to read and then reads to learn. And it used to be the magic point was fourth grade. You learn to read up until fourth grade, and essentially everything that happens from that point on is reading to learn. Mm-hmm. So this idea of reading at grade level at the third grade is a very good idea, but why stop there? We do have grade level markers at the second and the first. I mean, if we're only just figuring out that Johnny is behind in the third grade, mm-hmm. we still have catching up to do. Maybe less catching up than if we didn't check until fourth grade, but we're still playing catch up. Mm-hmm. So that's why these markers are so important.
Mm-hmm. And some of the more recent research indicates that if these kids are behind in third grade, they're not going to catch up, especially in this in poverty-stricken areas.
That's right. And it's not, and I'm not the education expert, but I understand that it's basic brain chemistry. Mm-hmm. Children are much more moldable and mm-hmm. teachable at the younger they are, and we have to get them when they're ready to learn.
Yes, the developmental stages. We are out of time for this half hour. I'm happy to say that Willa Powell will be here next week as well. And we'll be talking about some other issues, including a more active, possibly a more active school board, and also some initiatives that we hope to see more of. And we're going to be talking about some more of the problems that this district faces. Willa Powell, thank you very much for coming
my
here.
My pleasure.
Okay, thank you for being here for Spotlight on Schools. I'm Jim Strauss. See you next week.
Let's go!